It's only really since about 2010 that solar started taking off. Since that time, the cost of solar has dropped by 90%, which is an astonishing speed. A new government can change the messaging saying, look, this absolutely is the future. We absolutely are going to decarbonise the grid as fast as we possibly can. Solar is now deploying faster than any other energy technology in the world. It's such a good technology, it even works in Britain.
Hello, and welcome to Positive Energy, powered by the Eco Experts. I'm your host, Chris Hewett, and I'm joined by my co-host, Roland Ellison, the editor of the Eco Experts.
Hello.
Today, we're joined by Chris Hewett of Solar Energy UK. We're going to be talking big picture about the solar industry, how far it's come, where it's going, and what the government can do to accelerate solar generation in the UK. Thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
To get things started then, could you tell us a little bit about your background in the solar industry?
I trained with doing environmental technology degree. I started doing energy policy and climate sort of right from the word go, if you like. So I've always worked for think tanks or NGOs or government agencies. First half of my career was very much writing reports saying this is what government needs to do to get the green economy going. Then an opportunity came up in 2017 to join the trade association it was now. It's now called Solar Energy UK. Then to represent the people who are really doing it on the ground. And so that was a really exciting opportunity, and haven't looked back since.
Amazing. And so how would you say that the solar industry has changed over that time as well? Because we've kind of talked a little bit in the past about how, from our perspective, from like a consumer perspective, the understanding of solar panels has grown a lot in the last 3 years. There's almost a time where like having a solar panel on the roof of your home was unfathomable. And now you see them on like every other house now, don't you, essentially? So yeah, what have the changes been in that time from your perspective?
It's an astonishingly fast technology in terms of development. So yeah, back when I was writing those reports, I was writing about hydrogen. I was looking at fuel cells. We were not talking about solar. We were not talking about wind. It's only really since about 2010, when obviously those sort of feed-in tariff policies started coming in across the world, that solar started taking off. And since that time, the cost of solar has dropped by 90%,
Wow.
which is an astonishing speed. It's now deploying faster than any other energy technology in the world.
So with that in mind then, where do you see it in the next 5-10 years from here? What's the future of solar in that regard?
I think because it's such a flexible technology, it can be done at sort of large sort of utility scale and solar farms. It can be done all the way through commercial rooftops and warehouses, etc., all the way down to individual homes. It's almost like the sky's the limit for the technology. It's you can probably see about 10 years ahead. Beyond that, I think we know that there'll be some innovations that are coming which we haven't even thought of yet. But for now, I think the most exciting thing is that pairing of solar and batteries together. I think those two working together is really changing the dynamic of the industry.
And would you say that's because it's helping people be a bit more savvy with their energy usage and, you know, when to charge the battery and use the electricity the next following day? It feels like people have a lot more of a conscious, considered effort in like, we're going to do X, Y, Z tomorrow. It's a lower tariff then, this and that. I
think that's right. Yeah, it's certainly at that sort of household level. You can look at the app on your phone. You can say, oh, I can see my roof has generated this much. You can see what power you've got. You can see that some of it's going to a battery. You can see sometimes it might be being exported to the grid. Right now, you know that's actually means that somebody is turning down a gas-fired power station in the UK, which is for me, that's a very cool thing. I'm very excited to see that. So that's definitely happening at a sort of household level, but also at a grid scale level. We are getting to the point when wind and solar will in the next sort of 5-10 years become the backbone of the electricity grid. And then we will need an awful lot of balancing technologies. Currently, that balancing is done by turning a fossil fuel power station up and down again, but we are increasingly seeing batteries being used to do that, whether it's in the home, in a factory, or particularly on the grid as well.
Do you see that there's always going to need to be that balancing technology? So do you see like nuclear being that, filling that gap to just give constant power to?
I think nuclear will probably, we're going to have nuclear on the system quite a while. It's not a balancing technology. It really has to run the whole time. So you don't really turn a nuclear power station up and down.
Right, yeah.
Also, it takes an awful long time to build one. So I think what you will see, again, with both wind and solar and batteries, you see them moving very, very quickly in terms of technology. So I think they can be deployed and built very fast. The technology itself is improving very, very quickly. So I think that's where I see it's going to be. It's going to be wind, solar, and batteries are sort of the global dominant power technologies. And then you look at sort of electrification, whether it's electric cars or electrification of heat and heat pumps. Again, that means more of the fossil demand is going to be moved to electricity. And again, that's where excess renewables is going to really sort of start to power that.
So to backtrack a little bit then, where does this kind of all fit in with the work that you do with Solar Energy UK? And for anybody who's not familiar with what is the work that Solar Energy UK does?
So Solar Energy UK we're the trade association for the solar energy storage industry in the UK. So we've now got over 400 members, and that's grown really quickly. So in the last couple of years, it's grown from between sort of about 250 to 400, and it's still growing. We do what it says on the tin. We represent, if you like, all the interests of those businesses, and it's the whole value chain. So it's manufacturers, owners and investors in large solar farms, developers, installers of residential rooftop systems, etc. So we represent their interests. We identify where the barriers are to the growth of the sector, and then work on whether it's policy or whether it's marketing sector, or whether it's sort of helping with things like recruitment and skills. We deliver those services to try and unblock those barriers and help the industry grow as fast as we can.
One of the things we saw recently was Solar Energy UK launched its manifesto about how to, overcome some of the challenges and problems there are in the solar industry. I wonder if you could expand on some of the sort of key parts to that manifesto.
So the first thing to say is that the next 5 years are absolutely critical for the energy transition, not only in the UK but globally. So it's a really important agenda item for this new government to really fast track the energy transition. So we are tackling climate change as fast as we need to. So the first thing we're asking for the new government is for ambition, really clear ambition. So we're talking about 50 gigawatts of solar sort of built by the end of this Parliament, 2030.
And so where are we now in terms of gigawatts?
That's around trebling, around sort of 2.5 trebling. So probably by the end of this year we'll be nearly 20 gigawatts.
Right.
And so it's that kind of
And that's
level.
Domestic and everything.
That's
commercial.
all solar, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And actually, the target which the previous government had was 70 gigawatts by 2035. So it's that same trajectory to get us to the sort of net zero numbers we need. But also, we're saying we need clear ambition on energy storage as well. So batteries particularly are really important to this transition. So we're saying 30 gigawatts of energy storage is required by 2030 as well. So those are targets, but what we obviously need is particular things to be done to get to those targets. So there's kind of 5 areas which I guess we would highlight. First is just straightforward, just embrace the technology, embrace the potential for solar energy storage in the UK. And that's, you can signal that through the planning system, you can signal that through what you do with the public estate. We should be putting more solar on public buildings, etc. Second area is something which is important to obviously this podcast, particularly to the residential market, and make sure we really sort of maximise the opportunities for getting as many people have access to solar energy storage as we can. So that's and the first easy step there is to talk about new build homes and say we absolutely need to mandate solar energy storage, heat pump and EV charging as should be sort of standard technologies for any new build home. Third area is turbocharging the grid. So we need the grid needs to change to adapt to the new technologies which are out there, solar energy storage and wind particularly. That's going to need some investment and some more money spent on the grid.
I think that's quite significant investment.
It's a significant investment, but it's also about the way it operates and just really sort of becomes fit for purpose for these new technologies. So it was designed for coal-fired power stations, nuclear, gas, large power stations stuck in the middle of the countryside, pumping power into the cities. Now, clearly, we have much more distributed energy generation, and it's going 2 ways. And we're talking about new demands like electric vehicles and heat pumps and the use of batteries. So it's a real change in mindset for how that grid changes as well. So there's sort of 2 things there. We also need to look at the workforce and skills. So there are huge opportunities. Yeah, our sector is growing really fast, but we need to make sure that there's enough people who have the skills who can be transferred into our industry. And potentially from other energy sectors. I think there's a real sort of transition opportunity there for getting people to move from the old technologies into the new. So there's an opportunity of something which the government needs to do there to make sure we're realising that as the UK economy.
So what sort of qualifications or where are the sort of areas where there's a shortage of skills? Is it in
electrical engineering is the classic one. We do need a lot more electricians for the whole transition. Solar needs them, battery storage, but also the upgrade of the grid that I talked about. Also, some of the construction jobs. We're going to be building a lot of new kit here. The last, if you like, boom in the solar industry, which under the subsidy era, sort of between 2010 and 2015, most of the solar farms were built by teams with experience from other parts of Europe coming in, building it, going home again. We don't want that to happen this time round. Clearly, there's now a pipeline which is growing and is continuous. So there's a real opportunity to invest in those constructions or engineering jobs to make sure that it's UK companies and UK workforce which are building those. So that's one other area of work that the government can lead on. The final area is market reforms and the way, if you like, sort of the energy market is governed, whether it's Ofgem or different sort of market incentives. We just need to be really clear that those need to be designed in a renewables first way. So it's not giving, if you like, sort of incentives through the back door for fossil fuel generation and maintaining some of the status quo. We just need to move to renewables fast. We know it's cheap. It's both wind and solar are the cheapest forms of electricity generation in the planet and in the UK. So we just need to get that investment done as quickly as possible. And I suppose the final just thing to say on that is there is a global race here. So every single country in the world, whether it's China, America, India, the European Union, is trying to invest as fast as possible in clean power because it is the next industrial revolution, frankly. So if our market looks like there are barriers, that investment will go to other countries because the opportunities are absolutely there.
I think between China and India, something like 70% of the solar market, right? They just kind of swept it up. How can UK consumers really think about anti-slavery, modern slavery policies and things about how, the sort of provenance or on the supply chains from some of these solar products? How can they be sure that they're getting things that have not been a bit dodgy in how they've come about?
So we've taken quite strong leadership here, working with our partners in Europe. So there's an initiative called the Solar Stewardship Initiative, which is jointly run by Solar Energy UK and Solar Power Europe, and that is designing a traceability sort of tool, if you like, to demonstrate and to improve our due diligence to make sure that those supply chains are, following all of the different ethical sort of principles we would hope they would do. That's starting to, we know that there's certain supply chains are starting to shift, and we know that manufacturers are able to look quite a long way down their supply chain now. So that's something which I think is a success, but we need to build on it. And the next step for that initiative is to actually bring in independent stakeholders to sit on the board of that, so that it's not the industry marking its own homework, because that wouldn't be right. So we think we're in a good place to be aware of those issues and be able to hopefully steer consumers to products which basically any company which signed up to that initiative is asking the right questions about this. So I guess that the other thing it's worth pointing out here is, are the same questions being asked of the fossil fuel industry? So if you are, of course, if we're building a solar farm, we want to put solar on the roof, we want to be clear of the sustainability of that supply chain. But do we know where the diesel being imported from, where the gas is coming from? The same question should be asked of the competitor sectors, I guess.
I suppose on that note then, what are the kind of challenges and barriers that Solar Energy UK faces with these kind of long-term strategies and, promoting the solar industry? You kind of touched upon it there about there being a bit of a point of contention between green energy and the status quo, essentially. Could you expand more on that?
We know as an industry exactly how fast these technologies are developing and how good they have got. I think it's probably in the wider public and certainly in sort of the mainstream media narrative that I don't think they've really caught up with that. So it sort of still feels like fossil fuels are the sort of the natural place where you get energy, whereas I know in the next 5 years that's going to flip. And we know that from Texas now generates more solar energy than it does from coal, which is extraordinary. California, there have been several months now where there have been periods where its entire electricity system is run on renewables. Right. So it's really starting to kick through. So I think that message needs to get through in terms of communications. But then there's two genuine challenges which are our sort of big priorities. One is the grid infrastructure and the networks, which I talked about. There is no doubt that the grid needs to change, and that needs a significant amount of investment and changes in practice. We're now getting to the point where there's more projects out there which can be connected to the grid in the short term. And there's a lot of work to try and solve that issue, but that is one issue. And that's global. It's not just a UK issue. We're hearing that. Every single of my counterparts around the world is saying that.
Presumably when they were digging oil wells and building pipelines and all that sort of thing, was there government support from that, or was that all funded by fossil fuel companies? And I guess the follow-up question is, when it comes to solar, can the industry itself fund some of the grid and the batteries and everything else? Can they help government in partnership? Because basically it's going to come down to money, right? There's probably billions of pounds that need to be spent on the grid, if not more. Where is that money going to come from? How is it best going to be put into place, I guess?
And I think you're right. A certain amount of it will be coming from the generators themselves. I think that's what, if you're connecting to a substation, quite often there might be some support which goes in to make that happen. I mean, the network companies themselves are private companies. They get private investment, it's regulated. So
is this the DNOs?
So the national grid or
Right.
the distribution network companies are sort of the national transmission lines, the big part, the big sort of stuff, and then the sort of the smaller lines, the lower voltage lines, which go into homes and offices
Right.
across the country. So both of those companies can invest and are able to invest, but I think it's up to government to allow that investment to happen fast enough.
Right.
I think that's one of the issues. But you mentioned fossil fuels. I think it's fair to say that, again, globally, including the UK, fossil fuel sector still gets subsidies. So whether it's tax breaks or whatever it might be, there's still a default subsidy to the fossil fuel industry, which really does need to be removed so that we can get on and decarbonise the system as quickly as possible.
Well, I guess there's that challenge as well between like having very cheap gas still. I mean, electricity is still quite expensive, right? So like, how can you overcome that in a gradual way so that, people who are struggling with energy bills are not going to feel the pinch of like some sort of lever that they're going to pull?
Well, obviously the price of electricity went up primarily over the last couple of years because of the price of gas. Yeah. So it was the price of gas that was driving that, not the price of renewables. So as we get more and more renewables onto the system, that will bring the price of electricity down, actually. I mean, there are some investments in the network which are required, but it was the price of gas that was driving up people's bills. So that, I think, will help shift that. But it's still not, and there are clear things which government needs to do to help, particularly those people who don't have access to capital, who are in fuel poverty. So I think there's still a role for grants to support, sort of in social housing and other areas where the access to capital is absolutely required. So I think that's something which government can do on that front.
Just to come back to that 50 gigawatt number, if you're going to put solar panels on every roof, on every home in the UK, or solar panels on every warehouse in the UK, which would contribute more?
You're right, it's not either or. I guess at the moment it's around about 2/3 of our total sort of capacity from solar comes from solar farms, from utility scale solar, and the rest will come from large rooftops like warehouses and domestic. I would imagine that proportions probably will stay roughly the same. It may, in the residential side, it may increase a little bit more because if we get new built homes all built with solar, that will actually drive quite a lot of increase in residential solar itself. It's always hard to predict. I think I'll say that now. Ask me in 2 years' time, I may well give you a different answer. But I think it's going to be that sort of proportion. I expect what you'll see. You also at warehouses. So the UK Warehousing Association, if you like, so my equivalent in their sector, they actually commissioned their own piece of research to look at how much solar they could get onto the warehousing sector, and their answer was 15 gigawatts, 15. So that's a significant amount. So there's potential for commercial rooftop is absolutely huge. And then you look at car parks, you can look at reservoirs, there's all sorts of places, again, go back to this flexibility issue. Solar can be applied in all sorts of situations. So I think we'll see a lot of that starting to bubble up.
Yeah, one of the things that we've seen recently is floating solar with the UK coastal areas. But I mean, I know it's very suited for wind, but would it also be well suited for floating solar as well?
I haven't seen too much in the way of offshore floating solar. I think there are certain in areas like Southeast Asia. I think some sort of calm waters offshore, I think are getting floating solar.
Right.
But I do know there's quite a lot of interest in looking at reservoirs in the UK, particularly because often reservoirs, if it's water company land, they'll probably have a sewage treatment works or have a pumping station, which uses a lot of electricity. So actually having floating solar next to it makes a lot of sense. So I suspect that will come through in the next 5 years as well.
So you talked a little bit about the sort of peak feed-in tariff era, that sort of pre-2016 period where solar panels were really storming. There was a big sort of peak of installations, and then I think between the feed-in tariff and the smart export guarantee was kind of a bit of a lull maybe, and then we sort of come back into the energy crisis, cost of living crisis, and sort of mid 2022 I think we saw like a real peak in installations. But when you look at the MCS stats for like 2024, there seems to be a sort of bit of a dip. Do you think that is like just people generally being skint in their houses? Like, I mean, I know everyone's feeling the pinch. Is that a reason, or are there other factors maybe that might be playing into that? Yeah,
and I think the underlying trend is upward. I think it's not. I think what we did see before was when there was a drop in the feed-in tariff, there was a sudden peak in demand, etc. I think those days are definitely gone. I think what we saw, going into 2020, actually, the entire industry were expecting 2020 to be a boom. They were hearing lots of leads, hearing lots of demand. Then COVID hit,
And it fell
obviously.
through the floor,
but,
right.
well, that was the thing. It didn't. It actually went up through COVID. So there were more installations carried on rising.
Because they're all outside
apart from
of
the
homes.
first lockdown. Apart from the first lockdown when it did go down, everyone was at home. But after that, it's mostly outside work. Actually, there was quite a lot of installations, and that carried on through 2021. Then obviously, we did have that Ukraine war and the gas price spike, and that's no question that drove more demand. There was suddenly people accelerating what they were probably thinking about doing anyway. I think actually right now is the time to do it. So I think what we're seeing this year is we're coming down from that sort of accelerated peak, but actually the numbers aren't too far off the tail end of last year. So it was kind of 15,000 installations a month for most of the second half of last year, and it's about 13, 14,000 now. So it's gone down a little bit, but not too much. So I think that underlying growth is still there, and it's driven partly because of things like electrification, things like people are thinking about an EV, even if they haven't got one yet. They're thinking maybe I'll get one in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
That's a massive driver, because if you have solar on your roof and you have an electric vehicle and you've got somewhere to park it and charge it, you're suddenly fueling your car for free. That's huge. And similarly, think electrification of heat. And then we come into the role of batteries. And I think, again, what we're hearing anecdotally, and it's not coming through in the MCS figures yet, because the MCS battery installation standards only just come in last year. So it's not really, we're not seeing it in those numbers
figures,
yet.
right? Yeah.
But the distributors are telling us, the installers are telling us, over 50%, sometimes up to 70% of their installs of solar have a battery with them.
Right.
So that trend is going to continue, and that's mainly because you can just use more of the power. So it's the advantage of solar is you save on your electricity bill. So if you can save more of that power for yourself, then you'll make more savings. Coupled with, again, some of the utilities, Octopus, OVO, and others now offering not feed-in tariffs but export tariffs. So 15 pence is not unusual now. So which is a lot better than the initial sort of SEG market rates, which are 3p or whatever. So I think that market of exported electricity is starting to come alive. So I think it's this sort of smart home, flexible, more electrified home, coupled with solar and batteries. I think that's going to continue to drive the demand.
And we're starting to see as well more flexible finance models as well, I guess, for people. So we've seen like you can rent panels and
there's a few models out there, subscriber models. For a few years we've had the sort of local authority bulk buy schemes as well. So where a company goes in, works with a local authority and offers one tender for a lot of work in one area. So that's a way of economies of scale in a particular locality. That's been done. There's the subscriber model, and those utilities, again, the Octopuses, the OVOs of this world, are now starting to offer it to their own customers. And so that's something, you're now getting the information about solar from your electricity supplier as well as potentially sort of local installers. And so these business models are starting to grow now. So I think that's where the scaling is going to start to come from.
Kind of intrigued by Octopus, because I'm an Octopus customer by default. That bulb went bust and we just kind of got passed over. But it seems like they've come from nowhere. Like, is it just a rebranded utility company, which is, or is it a UK company, or they just seem to be everywhere?
It's a UK company, and they see themselves as a tech company actually.
Right.
It's about the data. It's about the ability to look at this flexible system and how needs are changing, how generation is changing, understanding that at a very micro level, and they're able now to have much more sophisticated sort of offers with its time of use tariffs to even out the flow in the system through the market. So I think that's what they're seeking to do. They're clearly very interested in heat pumps. They're having a solar offer now as well, and batteries. And so
some wind. I think they installed wind at a Worthy Farm, Glastonbury, like a few years ago. So it's probably fair to say they're the market leader, but I think a lot will follow. I think that's this sort of things like virtual power plants, where you where companies will start to see actually there's quite a lot of exported energy at the right time of day. They could then sell it at a better price to other customers, and that's starting to happen now. So I think it's becoming. And I guess a lot of that is predicated on upgrades to the grid, because I think you mentioned about commercial installations and how important they'll be to reaching that 50 gigawatt milestone. Sometimes I think people get refused from the DNO or something because the grid can't really take the power that a massive solar rooftop would actually supply to the grid. So it's kind of a challenging one, right?
It is challenging. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes there genuinely isn't room on the grid. Sometimes it's kind of the way the system operates, so the way the system handles new generation, particularly variable generation like solar. So you will get, we've had plenty of examples where you've heard of a company saying, I want to put a megawatt on my roof. We're going to use most of that power ourselves. It'll export a little bit at some point, but actually what the DNO asks them to do is to allow capacity for that entire megawatt.
Right.
And this is solar, so the megawatt's going to be June the 21st at 12 o'clock. So it's never really going to hit that maximum. But for most of the year, it's a lot less than that.
Yeah.
Coupled with the fact that it's actually being used on site a lot of the time. So and actually some of the sort of area offices of DNOs haven't really got to grips with that, and their systems are just not geared up to handle that level of complexity. Another example, you get someone wants solar and a battery at a large, even at a solar farm. Until very recently, sometimes that was treated as, well, we'll give you 50 megawatts for the solar, 50 megawatts for the battery. Therefore, you need 100 megawatts of capacity to plug this in. Again, that's just not living in the real world, because you're only ever going to be using one or the other.
Yeah.
They complement each other. So I think it's just, at the moment, it's like the computer doesn't get it. The computer says no.
Right.
For a lot of these things. And so I think it's kind of in the weeds. So it's quite hard to articulate, I think, but it's actually quite important, particularly for those warehouse roofs, the ones you're talking about. So,
do you think there's still any work left to be done in terms of like misinformation or myths around solar to get everybody on board and backing?
I think so, I think it's still to the vast majority of people, it's still a new technology. It's still something which is quite different. And so I think so you're inevitably going to get that misinformation which is sort of passed around. Mm-hmm. So down to the very basic, well, it's not sunny enough in Britain it doesn't work. So it's the sun's not shining. Obviously daylight is what solar works on. I tend to turn that around and say, well, it's such a good technology. It even works in Britain. I mean, I know developers who are looking at the north of Scotland for a solar farm.
Yeah.
So, and Sweden, Norway, there's a solar industry. So that's really not a problem. I think as other technologies, this sort of package of technologies, whether it's electric vehicles, the batteries, flexible tech, which will allow you to sort of vary your consumption, people working at home more. I think lots of factors coming in to change that. But I think there's and I guess the other factor here is there are the incumbents, the industry that is trying to burn fossil fuel to heat your home will fan the disinformation. They'll quite happily repeat tropes around renewable technologies that don't work when they're misleading it at best and sometimes lies outright. And so that will happen. They also get picked up in certain bits of the media. I mean, again, there are clearly very sort of net zero skeptic parts of the media. I won't name the papers, but we all know the ones we're talking about. So that and they will again repeat the doubt and repeat the downsides and very rarely publish the upsides. And so that's kind of there in the background as well. But it's up to us as an industry and all of our members to sort of try and counter that with the positive news and sort of demonstrating it really, really works.
It's almost like it needs to be big industries pushing the sort of green agenda. You've got your octopuses that are offering like new deals for consumers, people doing their own research, but it is that kind of missing puzzle piece of the government actually fully backing this and making it easy for companies to actually fulfill green tech.
I think that is something which a new government can do. Is it can change the messaging, saying, look, this absolutely is the future. We absolutely are going to decarbonise the grid as fast as we possibly can, not just for climate change reasons, but for the fact these are the best technologies. This is the best way to take this forward. Energy security is really, really important. Exactly. And I think obviously price of gas and electricity was very high for a couple of years. It's starting to come down. It's not come down to the levels that it was previously. But I think in the back of our minds is we know where the gas comes from. We know where the oil comes from. These are not stable parts of the world. The fact that these price spikes could easily happen again. Yeah. They obviously have in the past with oil. The thing about solar is once you've got it, your power bills are sorted for 25, 30 years. It's that security in the other sense, in the sense that you just know what the cost is going to be. It's sort of covered.
We also talked a little bit before we hit record about how you have solar on your roof and you have your app where you can kind of optimize your usage throughout the day. It feels like that's the route this is taking on a consumer-based level of like people getting a little bit more savvy, getting a little bit more kind of smart with how they use their energy.
I mean, being a bit of an energy geek, obviously, I love the app. I love to be able to say, oh, look how much is being generated and where is it going to my battery? Is it going to the grid? So that, I think that's, and for some people that will be absolutely, that'll be a really attraction to it. You can also see how much your electricity consumption is and think, really, did that kettle need that much?
Yeah, exactly.
Things like that. So it's sort of, it's awareness raising in that sense, I think. The mass market will probably be interested in the companies, if you like, doing it for you, making it simple. So that's where the time of use tariffs are going to come in. I think it's when, like I said, we're going to be within 5 years, there's going to be a situation where we'll have excess renewables at some point. Yeah, it'll be a windy, sunny day. There'll be more renewables than the country needs. That will drive down the instant price in the market. That's then the time where you want people to be charging their electric vehicles or putting it all in their batteries. And the price signals will start to come through. I think you will see companies, and Octopus will probably be the first, but others will follow, who will be offering that cheap electricity at the time when the system needs you to use electricity, as opposed to the flip side, where there'll be other times when it becomes quite expensive. And that will be about the data and the tech and understanding where the demand is. We can predict where the generation is going to be, or weather forecasting again is going to be interesting here. We'll be able to see, we know there's high pressure coming. We know there's going to be a lot of solar on the system over the next few days. That will change the way the market works. I think that's what's going to happen. I think it'll be made simple for the consumer. I think that's the way forward.
We saw, I think recently, was it like a green council in, I think it was in Kent somewhere, who would refuse planning permission for a solar farm.
Yeah, you do get occasionally. They always get appealed and generally get turned over.
Right,
Yeah,
so there is that sort of planning challenge, I guess, with large scale solar.
There is a perception that solar farms are unpopular, and that's actually not true if you look at the numbers and proper opinion polling. There's a silent majority who are very, very in favour of renewables, even in their own locality. So when we and others, the government's done polling, we've done polling, you tend to get 70 or 80% of people saying they would be supportive of more solar farms in their area. So I think that's something I'm hoping to see in the debate is those people who really do want to see climate change tackled will start to express themselves a little bit more vigorously. So actually, we do want this in my backyard. Right. We're in an election year, and it's looking at all the opinion polls. If renewable energy was a political party, it would be an absolute landslide. There's no question. It's extremely popular in comparison to every other technology out there.
Yes.
Solar and wind are streets ahead of everything else. And so that really needs to start coming through in the planning system. I think that's why I'm hoping that a refreshed government will start to understand that real where the opinion in the public is.
Great. Well, that feels like quite a natural place to end today's episode, I think. Chris, you've been wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us. And I look forward to seeing how things land. This episode is coming out a little bit later than the election, so we'll see how that sounds, but also in the next 5 years to see how kind of opinions on solar has changed as well. So yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
If you have a question about solar panels, heat pumps, double glazing, EPC ratings, or even charging your EV at home, then get in touch with us and maybe we can discuss it next time on Positive Energy.
All you need to do is contact us via the EcoExpert social channels on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, or you can email us at info@theecoexperts.co.uk.
Please like and subscribe to Positive Energy wherever you're watching or listening, and we'll see you next time.